Let's now create a fact component. And in doing so, we will learn about one of the most fundamental React concepts, which is props. And let's first close our terminal here. So I didn't really explain this before, but this process here in the terminal that we started with, well, now it's actually gone, but remember how we wrote npm run start. And so that's what created this basically fake local web server where our application is now running. And so that's what's responsible for reloading the page when we save the code here, right? So that process is still running here all the time in the background. So that's why we have still this terminal open here, but we can actually close this terminal because we are only closing this visible panel here, but the terminal in background is still running. So only if we trashed it here, then we would kill it. So then it would stop, but we can close it so we have a little bit more space here. But anyway, remember how by the end of the last lecture, we said that we were going to create a fact component so that we can then reuse that fact component for each of these items here, each of these list items. So each of them will then become a fact component. So let's do that. Let's create a new component with a new function. So function, and remember we need to start with an uppercase letter. No inputs for now. And now what we want to return here is basically all of this. So the entire li element. And so with this we make our fact list a little bit cleaner. So this is something very common to do in React. So let's return exactly that. So only this list item. Now once we save this, we get all kinds of problems here, but let's talk about them one by one. So for now, let's keep doing what we were doing, which is to now include this fact component here for each of the fact objects in the array. So before we were directly creating this list item, but now instead of that, we can simply use the fact for each of the elements in the array. So here we will now create 3 so-called fact instances. So instances of the fact component. But we can simply say that these are going to be 3 components. All right. But now this creates another big problem. And that problem is, what actually is this fact here? So where does that data here come from? So of course, before the fact object came here from the map method. So it was the current element in the array. But now, well, here, this fact object has no meaning at all. And so we need some way of passing this fact data into this fact component. Now, if we were calling this function here normally in JavaScript, we would simply do this, right? Actually this, and then we could pass it some data. Let me just comment this because this is not real code. So we could then pass some data into it, for example, this fact object, and then inside of the function, here we could accept that as an argument like this, right? So this is the way we have been written functions before in the previous section, right? So in React, we have a different concept, which is not passing arguments, but passing props. So let me show you how it works. But the idea is very similar. So passing data from one component to another. So here we specify fact, and we can really call this whatever we want. And then here is where we open JavaScript again, and then we pass in this fact object. So just to avoid some confusion, let's maybe call it fact obj here. And so now we need to simply accept. So we need to receive that fact obj data into this component. However, we do not do this. So that's not what we do. Instead, we simply receive one big props object inside of this component. And since this is just a function, we can actually log that to the console. And so then we can see what props actually is. So Now it doesn't work because we have these errors here. So where fact is not defined. So let's actually comment out the entire code. And again, you don't need to do this. I just want to show you. And here it is. So here, this is basically the result of logging props to the console. So props itself is an object, and in there we have fact object. So fact object is exactly this fact that we passed in. And it is called fact object because that's the name of the prop that we specified here. All right, and so here we can now basically use props.fact. Let's actually write that. So we could do props.factObject.id. All right. However, that would be a lot of work. And so we could also use destructuring to take the fact object out of the props. So remember how we did that before. So we did destructuring using the curly braces, then fact object equal props. So remember from the previous JavaScript section that this is how we do destructuring. So it's basically the same as writing object equals props.fact object. Okay, that's the exact same thing. So that's one way, but we can actually take it one step further and do this destructuring right here where we receive the argument of the function. So let's do that. And so this is what we are going to use. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. And now I just want to go back to actually calling it just fact. So let's call it fact, and then we change it here as well. Then we change it here as well, give it a save, and here we are. So here is now each of the list items again, but now each of them is a new component. Let's reload to get rid of the errors. Yeah, and here we have again the problem with the unique key prop. So remember how we needed to add this key here because of some internal React optimization, but now we need to remove it from here and place it right here on this fact, because it needs to be immediately on the first element that is right here inside facts.map. So give it a save. And so that fixed the problem. And now I want to again come here to the components tab so that we can now see our new component tree. So you see that inside facts list, we now have one component for each of them. And we also have their key here, right? And if we click on them and give it even more space, we can see down here the fact prop. So here we have a list of all the props that was passed into each of these components. And so this is how we pass data between parent components and child components. And of course we could pass any arbitrary thing that we want. So we can create a test prop, and here we can just specify any value that we want. And so now all of them will get the 23 prop, as we can see here. And we can also, if we want, write that here. So now we are destructuring the props object into fact and test. So this test, of course, needs to be exactly the same string as there. And so we can now use it here, for example, to log it to the console. So we get 23 3 times. So never mind about the grade ones here. So this is 3 times, of course, because this component here was created 3 times. So basically what React does, each time that a component is rendered, it will run the component function. Okay, but of course this prop is not necessary. Well, the fact one of course is, but this one is not. So let's just remove test. And yeah, nice. There's just one more small thing that I want to do here, which we didn't do earlier. So we didn't do in the other application. But here I thought it might be fun to create another element in our JSX, which will contain the amount of facts that are in the database. So let's say there are, so just that we can test our knowledge of JavaScript and JSX a bit more. So how can we say how many facts are in this array here? So we need to, first of all, in JSX, enter JavaScript mode again. And then here, we can simply say facts, which is an array. And then we can read the .length property from it. Remember that? So there are, and it will now be 3. So there are 3 facts in the database. Add your own. Give it a save. And then here we have the small text here in the end. There are 3 facts in the database. Nice. Now there's just one small thing that I noticed, or that I just thought of, which is the fact that earlier we had this element. Let's close that. So we had all of our HTML inside of this class, so inside of this div with the container class, right? But right now we don't have that yet. And we didn't do that because actually React already wraps our entire code into a div. So I told you that at the very beginning, but it's no problem if you don't remember that anymore. But remember how I told you that the entire application will be placed inside here of this div. And so this is quite similar to what we have here with this container, right? So we can now go ahead and change our CSS, and instead of container, selecting the ID of root. So just that so our application works the same. Because right now, we no longer have that maximum width that we had before. Remember that? So yeah, let's close that. We can close this one as well. And now here our style. And so as I was saying, here instead of the container class, we now are going to select the root ID. So for IDs, we use hash, not dot, and then root. Give it a save, and there it is. So now we are back to having that max width, and the entire app is centered also. So we can see that here. Indeed, this is the div that React created for us. So with the ID of root. And in there is where we have all of this. All right. So let's go back here. That was just some small fix that we needed to do. And now in the next lecture, let's take care of adding this list here. So this list of all the buttons, which is something that we didn't do before. And so this will make our app even more complete. So this is something that we didn't do before with pure JavaScript. And so let's do that now here in React.